Would you please join with me in the responsive reading printed in your bulletins? For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven.
A time to be born, and a time to die.
A time to break down, and a time to build up.
A time to weep, and a time to laugh.
A time to mourn, and a time to dance.
A time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together.
Good Sunday to you, friends. My name is Jason Hubbard. I am one of your ministers, and we had one of those weeks here which tell me that all things happen for a reason. We had 3 different welcomers, all have various kinds of tragedy and misfortune which prevented them from being here today. So I am your welcomer. And I think what that tells me is that it gave us an opportunity to talk with you a little bit about something that I know is very meaningful and for some, the entry place to which Fountain Street has become a part of their lives. And that's our summer worship series. We have 2 more Sundays here in our beautiful sanctuary, and I can already see the fanning happening. The summer is upon us, and we move into the beautifully air-conditioned chapel, which will be set in its traditional form, and we welcome really interesting speakers to lead us through our practice of the summer. And it's different than we do here, and different, and I think, in a very helpful way. It's more intimate, and it brings not only members of our own congregation who have extraordinary and interesting expertise with which they can share and reflect on their spiritual religious journeys, but also brings to us some folks who are not a part of Fountain Street Church. And I wanted to lift a couple up to you just to whet your appetite and hope that you will choose to not only come yourselves, but invite others to come with you to Fountain Street in the summertime and to experience something different that may indeed welcome an extraordinary journey. Beginning on our first Sunday, the 19th of June, Mr. Brian Keeley will be with us. You may have bumped into Brian because we have a relationship with the agency that he serves as Director of Development, the RED Project in Grand Rapids, one of the most leading edge organizations in regard to AIDS and HIV, and as well now into overdose prevention. Brian brings a wealth of knowledge and a really interesting, quirky, and that's his own words, personality that I think will really help us to explore this very, very vital part of our work in Grand Rapids and throughout the world. And then the Sunday following that, just to give you one more, Julie Liskey, who is the executive director of something called Circles GR, which is a national ministry which has just begun in Grand Rapids, and they connect people in community around what they call leaders, who are actually folks living in poverty who seek to be mentored into higher levels of their own ability and stability in our community. It's a powerful bit of work that involves kind of a liaison relationship, something that I know that I am really interested to hear more about. And then beyond that, you're going to hear from folks you know and love like Jean Reed Bailey and Michael Crawford and Bruce Ling, who's involved not only in music but in environmental activism in our community. You'll even hear from a professor of psychology who's also a master beer brewer. You'll want to be there for that. Nessa McCasey will join us and I'm sure not only teach us more about the love and art of poetry, but probably ask us to participate in some way in which she has often done. And many, many more wonderful voices. So if this is your first time at Fountain Street, or this is the time in which you come to be the sage which says, I've been here a lifetime, I hope that you will not only welcome each other today, but that you'll welcome each other into the summer by coming and experiencing how our community lives its life out in the summer days. We are a place dedicated to freeing the mind, growing the soul, and changing the world. You belong here. This is Fountain Street Church.
These are members of our community who will sing for those who are dealing with illness or loss. The healing power of music goes right to your door. They're going to be singing a piece written by Issei Maria Barnwell, a wonderful woman of African ancestry, award-winning member of Sweet Honey in the Rock, and a member of the Unitarian Universalist community, and a degree holder from my alma mater. The words you'll hear, I want you to hear them with your voice, with your ear first, so you can listen to the music. Listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestor's breath and the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestor's breath in the voice of the waters. Breathe with them, won't you?
Listen more often to things
He teaches you how to sing like that if you'd like. Yeah. I hear your voice in the chapel when you're teaching others. If you aspire to sound like him, he can help you do that. This is the Sunday of the year when, because it is a weekend of memory, we honor our own. It is the custom here to read their names aloud, to let their names hover in the air, to hear the chiming of the bell, to say a word or two of honor and gratitude, and then let the silence hold us and them together in everlasting arms of care. I invite you now to attend with heart and mind, to give ear with your soul as well as your ear to the names of those who from our midst met death honorably and well and left our world better for their presence. Mary Jane Schmidt, Dr. James R. Irwin, Robert Wood, Lillian Nebeling, Nancy Hamilton, Barbara Wilcox Amberg, Janet R. Bacon, Marion Truckle, Janet DeWitt, Carol York, Louise Gauger Harris, Elizabeth Berna Betty Collins, Robert Borey, Marion Peterson, Clarence A. Anderson, Homer Earl, Barbara England, James McKay, John Zeiderveen, Marion Brower, Mary Stiles Kimmel, Margaret Marty, Louise Childs, Jerry Jean Lily McDaniel, Doris Gitlin Griffith, Mary Jean Brooks. And now these words of the great poet Stephen Spender, whose words are a prayer upon us this day. I think continually of those who were truly great, who from the womb remembered the soul's history through corridors of light where the hours are suns endless and singing, whose lovely ambition was that their lips, still touched with fire, should tell of the spirit clothed from head to foot in song, and who hoarded from the spring branches the desires falling across their bodies like blossoms. What is precious is never to forget the essential delight of the blood drawn from ageless springs, breaking through rocks in worlds before our earth. Never to deny its pleasure in the simple morning light, nor its grave evening demand for love. Never to allow gradually the traffic to smother with noise and fog the flowering of the spirit. Near the snow, near the sun, in the highest fields, see how these names are fetid by the waving grass and by the streamers of white cloud and whispers of wind in the listening sky. The names of those who in their lives fought for life, who wore at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. No greater words than these can summon our spirits to gratitude and memory. And so in silence, we lift them up and love them and carry them in our living hearts.
I wanna cross over
Thank you so much, Bryson. Pleasure to have everyone else hear what I overhear on a regular basis. And that's great. See, you're thinking, I don't know if I should go to church today. I could be home having coffee. You wouldn't have to go out and sit in church, and then you would have missed that. Something wonderful is always going to happen on a Sunday if you show up. That's true everywhere in life, obviously. In the sequence of passages called the Parashiot in Judaism, this passage from Jeremiah showed up yesterday, just a little bit. Thou didst swear to their fathers, speaking of God, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey. And they came in and possessed it. But they hearkened not to your voice, neither walked in your law. They have done nothing of all that you commanded them to do. Therefore you have caused all this evil to befall them. Sort of a sins of the fathers thing. We know that in our country. The sins of our fathers, mothers, our ancestors are always present, as illustrated by this story from a few years ago, but published, I'm reading today, because of the nature of the man who suffered. It was approximately 5 a.m. on November 19th, 2011, when Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., 68 years old, was at home in his public housing apartment in White Plains, New York, and his LifeAid medical alert necklace was somehow triggered, sending an alert to the LifeAid customer service operator, who in turn called the City of White Plains Department of Public Safety. In response, police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical technicians were dispatched. At Chamberlain's home, police knocked on his door. Chamberlain told them through the door he did not call them, did not require assistance, was not having a medical emergency, and asked them to leave. Police refused to leave and insisted that Chamberlain open the door. The police became more insistent and began banging on the door. Chamberlain then contacted the LifeAid operator asking them for help. He stated that the White Plains police were going to enter his home and kill him. Upon breaking down his door, they entered Chamberlain's apartment. Police alleged Chamberlain came at them with a butcher knife when they broke down the door. Chamberlain's family claims the elderly Chamberlain was unarmed and did not resist. Police tased him and then shot him with a beanbag round from a shotgun. Chamberlain allegedly continued to charge at officers with the knife when Officer Anthony Corelli shot him twice in the chest with live ammunition. A camera mounted on the taser captured the tasing but was not functioning during the shooting. Chamberlain later died in surgery at White Plains Hospital. The reason I tell you this story today is that he was a decorated Marine Corps veteran. And I tell this story to remind us all, as ever, that Black lives matter and should matter more. So I was speaking of rituals a few moments ago, and like all rituals, they kind of begin spontaneously, unplanned, anonymously. In this case, in Warrenton, Virginia, and Savannah, Georgia, and Decatur, Illinois. People in those towns and others began decorating the graves of soldiers who died in the Civil War. Began decorating them with flowers. Only years later did the towns begin to make bragging rights about who did it first. At least 10 towns claimed to be the first to begin what we called then Decoration Day. Only years later did they come out of the woodwork, so to speak, but it seems clear that only a few have documented proof. On May 1st, 1865, freed blacks and others in Charleston, South Carolina, heaped flowers on a mass grave of Union prisoners of war. Yale professor David Blight saying that, quote, "Black Americans recently freed from slavery announced to the world with their flowers, their feet, and their songs what the war had been about. It was called Decoration Day for a long time, as I said, only officially being made into Memorial Day in 1967, and it changed from being about the Civil War, obviously, to being about all who perished in military service. Flowers became flags, and the day became a holiday, and then it became a holiday weekend. It has always been an amalgam of religion and patriotism, a place where the line between church and state gets a little blurry. How could it not? Death is what religion does. Dying in battle is what patriotism is. For a decade, I served small towns in Massachusetts where everyone came out to parade and pray at the cemeteries. I was both second trombone in the town band and the minister of the Unitarian Church, which meant that I marched between the cemeteries and prayed between the gravestones. The names were often still names in my pews, long histories, 5, 6, 7, and 10 generations. It was a teenager from my church who hootily recited the Gettysburg Address from the band shell. And it was a matron member of my church and the leader of what we unkindly called the Women's Artillery, who with her deep New England accent intoned, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row." Here in our cathedral house is the original memorial to those who died in the Great War before we knew another greater one was in store. It's a chapel-like space with mosaics in the ceiling that combine military and religious symbols of heartfelt pride and loss. And in the last few years, we have made it a place for remembering our own, with names engraved in slate around the walls as they are engraved in our memory. For many years, well before my tenure, we have lifted up the names of those among us in this church who have died over the last year and read them aloud on this day. So what began as a spontaneous and very simple recognition of Civil War dead by putting flowers on graves is now a religious come patriotic ritual for the country and a personal ritual for all of us. I think that happened for a number of reasons, but one of which is because modern industrial technical society really has banished the dead from the living, separating what was often and until then very much connected. Those New England towns I served retain a bit of that pre-industrial life. The cemeteries are right down in the middle of town, right next to the town hall, maybe a little further out. You can't go for a drive without hitting a gravestone. But here in our modern life, we sequester the dead, as we often do the aging, into developments that look like nothing so much as gated suburbs with their manicured lawns and carefully planned roadways to make maximum efficient use of the land. We want our elders and our dead to be comfortably situated and out of sight. In China, though, when I was there, tearing along on high-speed trains looking out through the farm fields, there would be burial mounds in the middle of the wheat fields. Along the roads and paths in Japan, there were little Buddha statues erected called Jizos in honor of the children who died and needed help getting to the next life. Near the Piazza Barberini in Rome, in the lower level of a Capuchin church, is a chapel made entirely of human bones, skulls, femurs, humeri, tibias, and fibulas, all arranged architecturally so that you are encased in human bones. And just outside the old city walls in London, In the thick of the modern city is a place called Bunhill Fields, which contains hundreds of graves, including notable ones like Isaac Watts and Daniel Defoe and William Blake. And commuters walk through it all day long, and some even stop on a bench and eat their lunch, as did I. And those who heard my comments about the city of Varanasi know that the dead of India are cremated publicly and their ashes poured quite visibly into the river in which people bathe daily. The dead are visibly present in the old world. In our society, like I said, we keep them out of sight, and I think we keep them out of mind, but we're wrong. Deep in our living bones, we need a communion with the bones of our dead. It is our universal destination, after all. In ancient societies, the dead became ancestors whose spirits were revered and honored, sometimes at an altar in one's own home. We may believe we have outgrown the longing to commune with our ancestors, but if you're here on Memorial Day, it's because you feel that desire to be in touch with the dead, and not in a morbid sense at all. In May of 1999, Mother's Day weekend in fact, my father died quite unexpectedly. He'd been ill for a while, but it was still not expected. And as a preacher, it was hard to lead worship for a few weeks. I did it. I girded up my loins like a man, as it says in Job, and I manfully did my work. But the weekly worship at most Protestant churches, and certainly in my Unitarian church, left no room for public sadness or grief. There's a memorial service, but come on, how long does it take to get over a death? A week or two at most. So we are told. But grief stubbornly refuses to move along at the speed of modern life. At least mine did not. So some weeks later, I asked a rabbi friend of mine, Rabbi Joe, if I could attend services at his synagogue. You see, Jewish worship requires the repetition of a prayer called Kaddish, which means sanctification, at several points in the service. It's there to begin the service, in the middle, and at the end. And that last one, which is the benediction, as it were, is recited by those mourning or those observing the anniversary of a death, called Yahrzeit. You can't end the service without the dead being blessed and blessing you. That's why I began attending synagogue services. I needed to worship with my grief and my loss, not despite it. I wanted to bring my loss into worship, not leave it at the cemetery or the crematory. Liberal Protestant worship has no room for that, especially for its leader to have that. But the little synagogue, let me join their Kaddish. Let me stand in honor of my father, two of my children, and ultimately my mother. My dead had a place in their worship that it did not have in my own. Now, maybe I'm unusual, and perhaps I am morbid, at least some of you are thinking that, but I believe firmly that we all would be better off to be closer to our dead. Modern society, including the immense death industry, makes it really hard to do that. Death used to be closer, of course. Diseases we now prevent killed far more often. Hospitals and physicians were fewer and further between. Farm and factory work employed far more people and were notoriously deadly. For all the gruesome news we see and hear, ours really is a much safer and healthier world than that of our parents and grandparents, which is good. Do not get me wrong. I have no love for death or eagerness to accomplish it. But segregating and confining it and them to the world of hospitals, funeral directors, cemeteries, crematories, and yes, clergy, I think costs us a great deal spiritually, personally, morally. Call it continuity, call it perspective. But when you're close to the dead, you're always aware that there is something larger to reality than we know. There is more to it than we who stand here upon the earth for our brief moment. What that is, I am not so foolish as to pronounce. Oh, others do. But I am humbled by what I do not know. I simply know that there is more than I know. If, as I have heard it said, a philosopher is a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat, and the theologian claims to have found the cat, we in the liberal church know that said cat goes by the name of Erwin Schrödinger. That is to say, it is both alive and dead at the same time. We know that ultimate truth cannot be grasped, but it can be sensed. And if we are quiet enough, it may even come and sit in our lap from time to time. That's your theology for today. Communing with the dead is to live with the reality of their having lived, that what was still in a sense is, and that the paradox of William Faulkner's note is no longer a paradox. He observed that the past is never dead. It's not even past. I think we lose that when we are disconnected from the dead, which I mean the living past. When we find ourselves moved by funerals, stirred by ceremonies, touched by Barber's Adagio, or great poems like Auden's Funeral Blues or Stephen Spender's that I read, what we are feeling is the loss of the living past, the disconnection from the transcendently meaningful. On seeing Emerson's grave, Walt Whitman said, "It is not we who come to consecrate the dead. We reverently come to receive some consecration for ourselves and our daily work." That is what I needed many years ago. Kaddish is how worship begins. How it ends, it mimics the passage of life itself. When the mourners read it at the end, it is a benediction by the dead upon the living, the reminder that life and death is part of a larger whole that encompasses and embraces the living, the dead, and those who yet shall live. Only the dead can give us the blessing we crave, the consecration, as Whitman called it, as Lincoln called it. But how? We have no tradition of the Kaddish here, no family altars with flames burning. We only do this once a year. And when we do it, we wrap it in flags and then go to the beach. We have no place wherein our ancestors can give their regular benediction upon we, the temporarily alive. Should there be a prayer? A rack of votive life, a song, a bow or gesture of respect? Some ritual should exist for us, even for us. I do not know what it could be, but something should be done. More than once a year, maybe even every week, that begs their benediction upon us. Our living souls require some consecration that we cannot bestow upon ourselves. We need a Kaddish of some kind to save, not to save them, but to save us. And so in their memory, I conclude this sermon, saying, may the one whose name brings peace over all the world bring peace to all of us, and let us say, Amen. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my redeemer. Amen.